To understand Joseph Stalin, one must first understand the world that shaped him. The Russian Empire in 1878 was a land of stark contrasts, glittering palaces in St. Petersburg and Moscow, while the vast majority of the population lived in conditions barely removed from medieval serfdom. Georgia, though ancient and cultured, was a conquered province, its proud traditions subordinated to Russian imperial rule. Gori, Stalin's birthplace, was a small trading town of perhaps 7,000 souls, dominated by a medieval fortress on a hill. The streets were unpaved, disease was common, and life expectancy was short. Most families lived in single-room dwellings with dirt floors. This was the environment into which Joseph Bessarionis Yugashvili entered on December 18, 1878. The father, Bessarion Yugashvili Bessarion, Stalin's father, was once a skilled craftsman who owned his own cobbler shop. In the rigid social hierarchy of the Russian Empire, this made him relatively prosperous for a Georgian peasant. But Bessarion's story was one of decline, a trajectory his son would witness and perhaps internalize. Several factors destroyed Bessarion: the industrialization that brought cheap, factory-made shoes to Georgia, undermining his business; his alcoholism, which grew worse as his fortunes declined; and his violent temper, which drove away customers and terrorized his family. Historical accounts from Stalin's childhood friends and neighbors paint a disturbing picture. Bessarion would come home drunk and beat his wife Keke with his belt. Young Ioseb, trying to defend his mother, would also receive savage beatings. One neighbor recalled, "The child was weak and frail. The father beat him mercilessly whenever he was drunk." These beatings were not occasional. They were frequent and severe. Stalin later told a friend, "My father was a drunkard. He beat me so hard, I lost my hearing in one ear." Some historians believe this childhood abuse planted the seeds of Stalin's later cruelty, his inability to empathize, his need to dominate and never show weakness. Psychologically, growing up with an abusive, unpredictable father taught Stalin several lessons. Power is based on fear. Showing weakness invites attack. The world is divided between predators and prey. Trust no one, especially family. When Bessarion's business finally collapsed completely, he took work in a shoe factory in Tiflis and abandoned his family. He made sporadic attempts to reclaim his son, once even kidnapping him from school to make him work in the factory, but Keke fought back fiercely. Father and son rarely saw each other after that. Bessarion died in a drunken brawl in 1909, stabbed in a tavern fight. Stalin did not attend the funeral. The mother, Ketevan Keke Geladze. If Bessarion represented cruelty and failure, Keke represented devotion and ambition. She was born into a family of serfs. Her father was a bricklayer, and her mother worked as a domestic servant. She married Bessarion when she was very young, perhaps 14 or 15, as was common at the time. Keke had several children before Joseb, but they all died in infancy, a common tragedy in the 19th century. Joseb was her only surviving child, and she poured all her hopes and dreams into him with an intensity that was both loving and suffocating. She worked herself to exhaustion as a washerwoman, cleaner, and seamstress. Her hands were raw from lye soap and hot water. She took in laundry from Russian officials, Georgian merchants, and anyone who could pay. Every kopeck was saved for Joseb's education. Keke was deeply religious, a devoted member of the Orthodox Church. She believed fervently that her son would become a priest, a respectable position that would lift him from poverty and bring honor to their family. She couldn't read or write herself, but she recognized that education was the only escape from the grinding poverty that had claimed so many in Gori. Her relationship with her son was complex. She was protective, even obsessive. She rarely let him play with other children, fearing he would be hurt or corrupted. She cleaned him meticulously, dressed him neatly despite their poverty, and constantly reminded him of the sacrifices she was making for him. But she was also harsh and demanding. When young Ioseb misbehaved, she would beat him with a switch. She had high expectations and little patience for failure. Some historians believe this created in Stalin a deep anxiety about disappointing authority figures, an anxiety he later transformed into a pathological need to be the ultimate authority himself. Stalin's feelings toward his mother remained complicated throughout his life. After he came to power, he brought her to Moscow, but she was uncomfortable in the Kremlin's grandeur. She reportedly told him, "Joseph, what a pity you never became a priest." She died in 1937, during the Great Terror. Stalin attended her funeral, one of the few times he showed any public emotion. The scarred boy. At age 6 or 7, Ioseb contracted smallpox. The disease ravaged his face, leaving permanent pockmarks that would mark him for life. In an age when physical appearance was tied to social standing, these scars became a source of deep insecurity. Shortly after recovering from smallpox, another disaster struck. A horse-drawn cart or carriage, accounts vary, struck young Ioseb in the street. The accident damaged his left arm, leaving it shorter than his right, and with permanently reduced mobility. He learned to hide the deformity, keeping his left arm bent and close to his body in photographs, but it prevented him from military service, and later became another source of psychological scarring. These physical imperfections, the pockmarked face and the damaged arm, fueled Stalin's later obsession with projecting strength and perfection. Official Soviet photographs were often retouched to smooth his skin. He never allowed himself to be seen as weak or vulnerable. The student. Despite their poverty, Keiki managed to enroll Ioseb in the Gori Church School in 1888. He was a bright student with a remarkable memory. He learned Russian quickly, his native language was Georgian, memorized prayers and biblical passages, and sang in the church choir with a beautiful alto voice. But even in school, darker patterns emerged. Ioseb was intelligent, but also manipulative and cruel. He organized gangs of boys and orchestrated pranks that sometimes turned vicious. He would arrange for other boys to take the blame for things he had done. Teachers noted that while he was an excellent student academically, he had a difficult character and could be disrespectful. One schoolmate remembered, "We would play games, and Stalin always wanted to be the leader. If we didn't follow his rules, he would become furious. He had to win, always." This need to dominate, to control, to win at any cost, it was already present in the schoolboy from Gori. The seminary, where a priest became a revolutionary, 1894-1899, entering the Tiflis Theological Seminary. In September 1894, 15-year-old Ioseb arrived at the Tiflis Theological Seminary, one of the most prestigious institutions in the Caucasus. For Keiki, it was the culmination of years of sacrifice. Her son would become a priest. The seminary occupied an imposing building in Tiflis, the capital of Georgia. It was a boarding school where students lived under strict monastic discipline. The curriculum included theology, Church Slavonic, Russian literature, Greek, Latin, and Georgian history, though the last was taught from a decidedly Russian imperial perspective. But the seminary was also a pressure cooker of nationalist resentment and revolutionary ideas. The institution was run by Russian Orthodox monks who viewed Georgian culture as inferior and potentially subversive. Students were forbidden to speak Georgian in classes. Only Russian was allowed. Georgian books, music, and newspapers were banned. Violators were punished with solitary confinement in dark cells. For proud young Georgians, this was intolerable. The seminary, ironically intended to produce loyal Orthodox priests, instead became a breeding ground for revolutionaries. The rebel emerges, Stalin, initially seemed to be a model student. His grades were excellent, particularly in religious studies. He continued to sing in the choir, but beneath the surface, he was changing. He discovered forbidden literature through underground student networks. A secret library circulated books that were banned by the seminary, novels by Victor Hugo that portrayed social injustice, works by Georgian nationalist poets, and most importantly, the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Marx's Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto offered a comprehensive critique of capitalism and a vision of a future where workers would overthrow their oppressors. For a young man who had grown up in poverty, who had watched his father destroyed by economic forces beyond his control, who had seen his mother work herself to exhaustion for kopecks, Marx's ideas had explosive power. Stalin joined a secret reading circle called Mesame Dasi, the Third Group, a Georgian Marxist organization. They met in secret rooms, reading revolutionary pamphlets by candlelight, discussing how to overthrow the Tsar and create a socialist society. The seminary authorities became suspicious. Stalin's room was searched multiple times. Forbidden books were found hidden beneath his mattress and floorboards. He received multiple punishments: confinement to cells, loss of privileges, public humiliation. But the punishments only radicalized him further. He later wrote, "The seminary made me a rebel by treating us like prisoners. We were spied on, searched, insulted. Every day I was more convinced that the old world must be destroyed." The writings of a young revolutionary. During his seminary years, Stalin began writing poetry in Georgian. Some of these poems were actually published in Georgian literary journals under the pseudonym Sosilo. They were romantic nationalist poems celebrating Georgian nature and heroes. One poem translated reads, "Know that those who fell like ashes to the earth, who long ago were suppressed by the enemy, will rise again, winged with bright hope, above the great mountains of Kazbek." The imagery of resurrection and rising above oppression was clear. These poems show that young Stalin was initially drawn to Georgian nationalism as much as to Marxism, a combination that would later create tension when he subordinated national identities to Soviet communism, the expulsion. By his 5th year at the seminary, Stalin's revolutionary activities had become impossible to hide. The exact reason for his expulsion remains somewhat murky. Official records claim he missed final exams, while Stalin later claimed he was expelled for revolutionary activities. The truth is likely both. Stalin had become increasingly brazen in his disregard for seminary rules. He skipped classes, refused to attend services, and was caught multiple times with forbidden literature. When it came time for final examinations in 1899, he simply didn't show up. The seminary expelled him in May 1899, just months before he would have graduated and been ordained as a priest. Keike was devastated. Her life's dream, seeing her son become a priest, was shattered. She reportedly wept for days. She never truly understood or accepted her son's revolutionary path. But for Stalin, there was no regret. He later said, "I left the seminary, and I left God behind with it." Psychological transformation. The seminary years were crucial in Stalin's psychological development. He entered as a devout Georgian boy who sang hymns. He left as an atheist, Russian-speaking Marxist, who saw religion as the opiate of the masses. Several key transformations occurred. 1. Loss of faith. Stalin abandoned religious belief entirely, replacing it with faith in Marxist ideology. This shift was important. He didn't become nihilistic, but rather transferred his need for absolute truth from religion to political ideology. 2. Hardening of character. The harsh treatment at the seminary, combined with the conspiracy and secrecy of revolutionary activities, made Stalin more calculating and ruthless. He learned to hide his true thoughts, to smile while planning betrayal. 3. Intellectual foundation. Marx gave Stalin a comprehensive worldview. History was a struggle between classes. Capitalism exploited workers. Revolution was not just desirable, but historically inevitable. Violence in service of the revolution was justified, even necessary. 4. Organizational skills. Managing secret reading circles taught Stalin how to build networks, identify loyalists, and maintain security. These skills would serve him well in his revolutionary career. When Stalin left the seminary in 1899, he was 20 years old, educated, radicalized, and ready to dedicate his life to revolution. The professional revolutionary, years underground, 1899-1917, early revolutionary work. After leaving the seminary, Stalin needed employment. He briefly worked at the Tiflis Observatory as a clerk, recording meteorological data. But this was merely a cover. His real work was revolution. He threw himself into organizing workers in Tiflis's factories and railway yards. Georgia was industrializing rapidly. Oil fields in Batum, railway construction, textile mills. This created a new class of urban workers, living in terrible conditions, working long hours for low wages. Exactly the proletariat that Marx predicted would rise up. Stalin organized study circles, teaching workers about Marxism. He wrote and printed illegal leaflets on underground presses. He organized strikes and demonstrations. He was charismatic when he wanted to be, capable of inspiring workers with visions of a better world. But he was also willing to use violence. When strike breakers threatened worker solidarity, Stalin organized gangs to intimidate or beat them. When police informants were identified, they sometimes disappeared. Revolutionary work wasn't intellectual debate. It was a dangerous underground war. First arrest and exile. The Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana, had extensive networks of informants. In April 1902, they arrested Stalin during a raid on a Marxist meeting. He was 23 years old. After months in prison, Stalin was exiled to Siberia, to the remote village of Novaya Uda in Irkutsk province. Exile to Siberia was a traditional Tsarist punishment for political prisoners, a vast frozen wasteland where prisoners could be forgotten. But Stalin had no intention of staying. In January 1904, after just 4 months in exile, he escaped. He made his way back across thousands of miles to Tiflis, traveling by foot, by cart, hiding in safe houses along the way. This pattern would repeat: arrest, exile, escape. Between 1902 and 1913, Stalin was arrested and exiled 7 times. He escaped 6 times. Each escape required courage, cunning, and help from underground networks, and each successful escape enhanced his reputation among revolutionaries as a man who couldn't be held. The 1905 Revolution, a dress rehearsal. In 1905, Russia exploded in revolution. Years of economic hardship, military defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, and political repression culminated in massive strikes, peasant uprisings, and mutinies in the military, including the famous battleship Potemkin. Stalin was in the thick of it, organizing demonstrations in Georgia. In Batum, protests turned violent. In Tiflis, armed gangs clashed with police. For a brief moment, it seemed like the Tsarist regime might fall, but the revolution ultimately failed. The Tsar made limited concessions, the Duma, a weak parliament, and then used military force to crush the uprising. Thousands were executed or sent to Siberia. The 1905 revolution was a dress rehearsal, as Lenin called it, for 1917. It showed both the revolutionary potential of the Russian masses and the ruthlessness required to seize power. Meeting Lenin, the crucial alliance. In December 1905, Stalin attended a Bolshevik conference in Tampere, Finland, where he finally met Vladimir Lenin face to face. Lenin was already the dominant figure in Russian Marxism. Brilliant, driven, uncompromising, he had split the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party in 1903, creating the Bolshevik faction that demanded a disciplined, centralized party of professional revolutionaries. Stalin was initially disappointed by Lenin's appearance. He was a short, balding man with a goatee, not physically impressive. But when Lenin spoke, Stalin was captivated. Lenin's clarity of thought, his tactical brilliance, his willingness to make difficult decisions, Stalin recognized a leader worth following. Lenin, for his part, appreciated Stalin's effectiveness. While many revolutionaries were intellectuals who spent time in cafes debating theory, Stalin was a practical organizer who got things done. He was willing to do the dirty work, the expropriations, bank robberies, the intimidation, the violence that financed and protected the revolution. This alliance would shape the 20th century. The Great Tiflis Bank Robbery, 1907. One of Stalin's most infamous operations was the 1907 Tiflis Bank Robbery, also known as the Tiflis Expropriation. On June 26, 1907, a convoy carrying tax money, about 250,000 rubles, equivalent to millions today, was moving through Yerevan Square in the center of Tiflis. A gang led by Stalin's associate, the Armenian revolutionary Kamo, Simon Ter-Petrosian, attacked the convoy in broad daylight. They threw bombs into the square, killing guards and bystanders. In the chaos, they grabbed bags of money and fled. The attack killed dozens of people and wounded many more. Blood ran in the streets. It was a spectacular act of revolutionary violence. Stalin was not present at the robbery. He was coordinating from a distance, maintaining plausible deniability. But he had planned it, recruited the participants, and arranged for the money to be smuggled to Lenin in Finland. The robbery caused a scandal within the revolutionary movement. Many Mensheviks and even some Bolsheviks were horrified by the civilian casualties, but Lenin defended it as a legitimate revolutionary act. The money financed Bolshevik activities for years. The Tiflis robbery revealed crucial aspects of Stalin's character: his willingness to use extreme violence, his ability to plan complex operations, his skill at maintaining distance from criminal acts, his understanding that revolution required money and blood personal life. The death of Cato. Amidst revolutionary activities, Stalin had a personal life, though he subordinated it entirely to politics. In 1906, he married Katevan Cato Svanidze, the sister of one of his revolutionary comrades. She was a seamstress from a respectable Georgian family. By all accounts, She was gentle, kind, religious, everything Stalin was not. Their marriage was brief and tragic. In March 1907, Cato gave birth to their son, Yakov, but she was already ill with typhus or tuberculosis. Sources differ. She died in late 1907 when Yakov was just months old. Stalin was reportedly devastated. At her funeral, he made a dramatic gesture. He placed his hand on his chest and said to a friend, "This creature softened my heart of stone. She died, and with her died my last warm feelings for humanity." Whether this was genuine emotion or theatrical performance is debatable, but after Cato's death, Stalin seems to have become even more hardened, more focused exclusively on revolution, less capable of human warmth. He abandoned his infant son to be raised by Cato's family. Stalin saw Yakov rarely and treated him with cold disdain. Years later, during World War II, when the Germans captured Yakov, Stalin refused prisoner exchanges, saying, "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." Yakov died in German captivity, possibly by suicide. The Deep Underground, 1908-1917. The years after 1905 were difficult for revolutionaries. The Okhrana had become more effective, infiltrating revolutionary groups, breaking up cells, sending thousands to Siberia. Stalin moved between Batum, Tiflis, Baku, and St. Petersburg, organizing, writing, and evading capture. He adopted multiple pseudonyms: Koba, David, Ivanovich. He developed techniques for underground work: safe houses, dead drops, coded messages, compartmentalization. In 1912, Lenin appointed Stalin to the Bolshevik Central Committee. It was recognition of his value to the party. In 1913, Stalin wrote his first major theoretical work, Marxism and the National Question. Written during a stay in Vienna, the essay addressed how a Marxist party should handle the Russian Empire's many national minorities. Stalin argued for a unified state structure that preserved cultural autonomy, but subordinated nationalist movements to class struggle. This essay established Stalin as more than just a practical man. He could engage in theoretical work, though he would never match the intellectual sophistication of Trotsky or Bukharin. The final exile. In 1913, Stalin was arrested again, this time due to betrayal by Roman Malinovsky, a Bolshevik leader who was secretly an Okhrana agent. Stalin didn't know this at the time. He was sent to Siberia, to the remote Arctic settlement of Kurika. This exile was harsher than previous ones. Kurika was beyond the Arctic Circle, dark and frozen for months at a time. Stalin spent 4 years there, from 1913 to 1917. It was his longest period in exile, and there was little chance of escape. The cold was too severe, the distance too vast. During this time, Stalin lived with a local family. He fathered at least one child, possibly two, with their teenage daughter, Lydia Pereprizhina. She was 13 or 14 when the relationship began. This relationship, documented in local records, reveals Stalin's exploitation of vulnerable people, even in personal relationships. Stalin was still in Siberian exile when World War I began in 1914. The war would destroy the Russian Empire and give Stalin his opportunity. Revolution and Civil War, 1917 to 1922, returned from Siberia. In February 1917, the Russian Empire collapsed. Food shortages, military disasters, and years of oppression culminated in massive protests in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. Soldiers refused to fire on demonstrators. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated on March 15, 1917. A provisional government took power, promising democracy and reforms, but it was weak, divided, and committed to continuing Russia's involvement in the disastrous World War I. Stalin returned to Petrograd in March 1917, immediately taking a leadership role in the Bolshevik Party. He took control of Pravda, the party newspaper, and began publishing articles calling for Soviet workers' councils to seize power. When Lenin returned from exile in Switzerland in April 1917, he was initially isolated. Even among Bolsheviks, his call for immediate socialist revolution seemed too radical. But Stalin supported Lenin's April theses, helping to swing the party behind Lenin's vision. The October Revolution. The year 1917 was chaotic. The provisional government lost credibility as the war continued to go badly. Workers and soldiers increasingly supported the Bolsheviks, who promised peace, land, and bread. In October 1917, November by the modern calendar, the Bolsheviks struck. Led by Lenin and Trotsky, armed workers, soldiers, and sailors seized key positions in Petrograd. The storming of the Winter Palace, the provisional government's headquarters, was anticlimactic. The ministers were arrested with little resistance. Stalin's role in the October Revolution was significant, but not heroic. He was not leading charges or giving inspiring speeches. He was doing what he did best: organizing, coordinating, ensuring Bolshevik cells were ready to act. After the seizure of power, Lenin formed a new government. Stalin was appointed People's Commissar for Nationalities Affairs, responsible for policy toward the empire's many ethnic minorities: Ukrainians, Georgians, Armenians, Central Asians, and dozens of others. The Civil War begins. The October Revolution triggered a devastating civil war that lasted from 1917 to 1922 and killed millions. The opposing sides, Reds, Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, committed to building a socialist state; Whites, anti-Bolsheviks, a coalition of monarchists, liberals, nationalists, and foreign interventionists; Greens, peasant armies, fighting for local autonomy against both Reds and Whites. Nationalist movements, Ukrainians, Poles, Finns, and others seeking independence. The country descended into chaos. Cities starved as food supplies collapsed. Disease epidemics killed millions. Bands of armed men roamed the countryside, pillaging and killing. It was a humanitarian catastrophe on an almost unimaginable scale. Stalin, as War Commissar Stalin, was sent to various fronts as a political commissar, enforcing Bolshevik authority and discipline. His methods were ruthless. At Tsaritsin, later renamed Stalingrad, now Volgograd, Stalin clashed with Trotsky over military strategy. Trotsky wanted to use former Tsarist officers as military specialists, supervised by political commissars. Stalin distrusted these officers as potential traitors. Stalin conducted extensive purges at Tsaritsin, executing suspected counter-revolutionaries, former officers, and even Bolsheviks he deemed unreliable. He loaded prisoners onto barges, sailed them to the middle of the Volga River, and sank the barges, drowning hundreds at a time. Trotsky was furious and recalled Stalin from Tsaritsin. But Lenin supported Stalin's methods, recognizing that winning the civil war required terror and ruthlessness. The rivalry between Stalin and Trotsky, which began during the Civil War, would shape Soviet politics for decades and ultimately cost Trotsky his life. The Red Terror. The Bolsheviks implemented systematic terror against their enemies. The Cheka secret police, led by Felix Dzerzhinsky, conducted mass arrests and executions. After an assassination attempt on Lenin in August 1918, the Red Terror intensified. Thousands of class enemies were executed: nobles, priests, bourgeois, anyone deemed hostile to the revolution. Entire families were killed, hostages were taken and shot. Stalin supported the Red Terror enthusiastically. He understood that revolutionary transformation required breaking the old society completely, terrifying opponents into submission. The Bolsheviks also fought against nationalist independence movements. Stalin played a key role in the invasion of Georgia in 1921, forcibly incorporating his homeland into the Soviet Union. He showed no sentimentality. Georgia would be Soviet, whether Georgians wanted it or not. Victory and the creation of the Soviet Union. By 1922, the Bolsheviks had won. The White Armies were defeated, foreign interventionists withdrew, and nationalist movements were crushed. But victory came at a horrific cost. 712 million dead from war, terror, famine, and disease. The economy was in ruins, infrastructure was destroyed, society was traumatized. In December 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was officially created, incorporating Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Central Asian republics into a single socialist state. Stalin was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party in April 1922, a position that seemed administrative but would become the most powerful office in the Soviet Union. The struggle for Lenin's throne, 1922-1928. Lenin's illness and the testament. Vladimir Lenin suffered his first stroke in May 1922. He partially recovered, but suffered more strokes in December 1922 and March 1923, leaving him unable to speak and increasingly paralyzed. As Lenin's health declined, he became concerned about the future. He dictated notes assessing the party leadership, known as Lenin's Testament. About Stalin, Lenin wrote, "Comrade Stalin, having become General Secretary, has concentrated enormous power in his hands, and I am not sure he always knows how to use that power with sufficient caution." Then, on January 4th, 1923, Lenin added a crucial postscript. "Stalin is too rude, and this fault becomes unbearable in the office of General Secretary. Therefore, I propose to the comrades to find a way to remove Stalin from that position." But Lenin's testament was never publicly read. Stalin, working with Zinoviev and Kamenev, who also feared Trotsky's ambition, convinced the party leadership to suppress the document. Lenin died on January 21st, 1924, at age 53. His body was embalmed and placed in a mausoleum in Red Square, against his widow's wishes, but creating a secular shrine to the revolution. The succession battle begins with Lenin dead. A power struggle erupted. The main contenders, Leon Trotsky, brilliant orator and writer, military genius who created the Red Army, committed to permanent revolution, spreading communism worldwide, arrogant, intellectual Jewish, which would be used against him, popular among younger party members and Red Army officers, Joseph Stalin, General Secretary, controlling party apparatus, practical administrator, not a theorist, advocated socialism in one country, building Soviet power first, master of backroom politics, Georgian from a working-class background, one of us, Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, old Bolsheviks, Lenin's close associates, leaders of Petrograd and Moscow party organizations. Initially allied against Trotsky, Nikolai Bukharin, leading party theorist, editor of Pravda, favored moderate economic policies, intellectual, less skilled at political maneuvering. Stalin's strategy: divide and conquer. Stalin's political genius lay in understanding that power in the Soviet Union came not from public popularity, but from control of the party apparatus. As General Secretary, he appointed regional party secretaries, controlled party membership, and determined who attended party congresses. Phase 1. Isolate Trotsky, 1923-1925. Stalin first allied with Zinoviev and Kamenev to marginalize Trotsky. They portrayed Trotsky as arrogant and elitist, accused him of Bonapartism, seeking military dictatorship, used subtle anti-Semitism. Trotsky isn't really Russian. Controlled party meetings to pack them with Stalin loyalists. Trotsky was brilliant, but politically inept. He refused to engage in petty political maneuvering, believing his ideas and Lenin's legacy would prevail. He was wrong. At Lenin's funeral, Trotsky was reportedly given the wrong date by Stalin and didn't attend, a massive political blunder that made him seem disrespectful. By 1925, Trotsky had been removed from his position as Commissar of War. He was politically isolated. Phase 2. Eliminate Zinoviev and Kamenev. 1925-1927. With Trotsky marginalized, Stalin turned on his former allies. He now allied with Bukharin and more moderate party members, accusing Zinoviev and Kamenev of lacking faith in socialism's success in Russia, creating factionalism, forbidden by Lenin, insufficient support for industrialization. Zinoviev and Kamenev, realizing their mistake, tried to ally with Trotsky in the united opposition. It was too late. Stalin controlled the party apparatus. At the 15th Party Congress in 1927, the united opposition was defeated. Zinoviev and Kamenev were expelled from the party. Trotsky was exiled, first to Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan, then expelled from the Soviet Union entirely in 1929. Phase 3. Turn right, then destroy the right. 1928-1929. Stalin had defeated the left opposition, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, by allying with the right, Bukharin, and advocating moderate policies. But once his rivals were gone, Stalin abruptly shifted left. In 1928, Stalin announced radical industrialization and collectivization, policies far more extreme than anything Trotsky had proposed. Bukharin and the moderates were horrified, but it was too late. By 1929, Bukharin had been removed from leadership positions. Stalin stood alone at the top of the Soviet power structure. Why did Stalin win? Stalin's victory was due to several factors. 1. Control of the bureaucracy. As General Secretary, he appointed loyalists throughout the party. 2. Underestimation. Rivals dismissed him as a dull bureaucrat. 3. Patience. Stalin moved slowly, never revealing his full ambitions. 4. Divide and conquer. He allied with different factions against each other. 5. Ruthlessness. He was willing to destroy anyone, even former allies. 6. Luck. Lenin died before definitively removing him, but perhaps most importantly, Stalin understood something. His rivals didn't. In a totalitarian party, ideological brilliance mattered less than institutional control. You didn't need to be the best orator or theorist. You needed to control who got to speak at all. The transformation of Russia, industrialization and collectivization, 1928-1933. The 5-year plan, industrial revolution by force. By 1928, Stalin had absolute power. He now attempted something unprecedented, the forced industrialization of an entire continent-sized country in less than a decade. The first 5-year plan, 1928-1932, set impossibly ambitious goals. Triple industrial production, build thousands of factories, construct new industrial cities, achieve economic self-sufficiency. Stalin's slogan, "We are